Hiya, it's Io. I'm here to discuss today the Anniversary Blackrocks Depths raid. Now, I'm not here to talk about the anniversary event as a whole or in general. There's a little cute little things. There's some nice NPC interactions and all that, and that's all well and good. But today I'm more specifically talking about the raid, and normally I wouldn't make such like a clickbait kind of title, but I honestly wanted to make some kind of discussion about what they were thinking with this raid, and I'm trying to think what their plan with it was. Obviously, this whole entire expansion has been plagued with not enough testing on things, a lot of bugs and dungeons and raids, poor performance, FPS wise, and all the such. And so Blackrock Depths is going into its third third normal nerfs, like really big nerfs too, not like small like 5% things, like 20%, 30% health nerfs and damage. And Heroic is getting its second general health and damage nerf. And I wonder how they managed to miss their mark on the raid. It almost feels like, at least health wise, that every boss is tuned for another season and not for the current one. Damage wise, at least after the first nerf, it's still pretty high, but I think it's pretty manageable. Much more closer what you would expect. But because these boss fights go on for absolutely forever, you end up with healers running out of mana. You end up meeting soft enrages, 30% health, really far out that you would expect. You would hit maybe 5 to 10% health or something like that. Almost every boss feels like it overstays its welcome. You know, you'd read the abilities, you think, oh, that's kind of cute for like a little dungeon boss. You fight that for like a minute, and you said you'd probably have some good fun doing that boss fight. And then you get there, and you're there for 5 minutes, and you go, oh, it's not a dungeon boss. It's a tyrannical dungeon boss. And you're fighting that boss for 5+ minutes, every single boss in the raid. No boss is short. And they spawn ads and do their abilities like you expect from current dungeon bosses. They just, one after another into the mechanics. There's very little breathing room. So they're constantly spawning ads, you're constantly doing things. But those things aren't complicated. You're not doing anything complicated like Phase 1 Queen Answerect or Phase 3 Queen Answerect, or maybe even Silken Quartz. You just have to survive the raid damage, essentially, and kill the ads. So this raid is rather miserable, when it would normally be rather fun, especially when you consider it being an anniversary event. You'd expect, oh, it might be on the easier side, maybe. Maybe they have it a little overtuned the first week, but not to the extent that it is right now. Apart from the poor tuning, there's also other problems like lockouts. For some reason, this raid is the only one with a lockout that doesn't keep, so even adding people to the raid, you have to reset the raid, and you reset all the way to the beginning. You don't start where you left off. You can't save a lockout. And so even if you wanted to do this whole raid, or you wanted to at least kill each boss at least once, you can't really without devoting a lot of time each week, especially with how hard these bosses are currently. So at the time of me looking at Raid.io, there was only about 1,000 guilds that have killed this. And normally you would expect that for like a mid-raid kind of thing to be less comparatively to like the beginning of the season. But it's a lot less. There's like, I think almost 10,000 people that have killed Queen Answerek on Heroic. But for Heroic difficulty, Blackrock Depths, far, far less. Emperor Thosian, whatever his name is. So even if they fix the poor tuning, the third problem is the item level, the loot. They aren't buffing it. I doubt they have any plans to buff it because they don't want anniversary loot probably to be better than what the raid is, because this raid will probably be like maybe like another month or two before the actual patch to the next season. I know that's like probably going to be a small amount of time, but that'd be even relevant. But it's still something that they would be concerned about or get a lot of complaints about from people, that you had to do the anniversary event, although there is the dinar system, um, so that would be less of a problem. But for that to work, then you would need people to be able to actually be able to complete the raid, which is very few. You have to have a lot of time devoted to it. If the lockouts aren't really working and the gear is shit, there really isn't all that much incentive to do it. What I was going to do for my raid is that we were going to progress through the heroic bosses, then we just keep a lockout for the last two, and that way we could get two more bosses of mythic loot for our raid, especially because not everyone does mythic plus, and not everyone in our raid is capable of doing 10 pluses, or I guess 8s right now, but you get the point. Not everybody in our raid does 10s, mythic plus, or likes mythic plus. So we're going to do that so we can still get mythic upgrades, at least mythic crests, so we can get more upgrades or whatever. But that's not possible, or it is possible. We would be devoting basically an entire another raid night. Which is, I guess, a fourth problem is that I don't think mid raids are ever a good idea. I know people want them, and I think they only really work in a season 4 kind of Shadowlands Dragonflight kind of way, that there's nothing else to do. I think mid season raids have a lot of problems. It has to be more difficult than the current raid, where people would complete it on day 1, which is not necessarily or inherently a problem, but usually you don't want to be able to just go in there and kill whatever new raid bosses. That probably wouldn't look good for Blizzard, I guess. But then the other problem is item loot. If there's only a few bosses, then you have to like blow up each of the boss's loot table to have a big enough loot table where like everyone would want something, and that gear had have to be better than what you would be currently getting. If it isn't, then devalues if your raid even trying to go into that raid. And if it's hard, and if this raid is harder, then you usually aren't getting another season's worth of gear, and so you're not out gearing it as much as you normally would do it. So there's less and less people doing it. So typically, I would not recommend Blizzard making a mid raid unless it's like LFR normal. It's supposed to be for fun, like this. Maybe this event really should have been, and you could complete it rather easily. Maybe for achievements, maybe for mounts, and then maybe have some gear that's decent for alts and stuff like that. Because otherwise, you have to go through all these other problems. Because guilds progress raids at different paces, you can't really know when you release that mid raid if everyone, or whatever you deem is to be enough guilds to be progressed through that at that point, and then you don't really have your player base actually engaging with the new raid at all, and then that's a problem for the devs, that like no one's doing the content that you created, right? So is Blackrocks Depths a failure? I would say so. I'm sure other people would be like, no, it's for fun, or I see a lot of those comments like, oh, something's difficult and they want them to nerf it. No, I mean, none of these bosses. Yeah, first week, we tried it, got him to 30%, the first boss, which is a huge warning sign first boss should not be more difficult than the mythic first boss in Newer Bar Palace, but it is. You got to like 30% health, and then we just had too many ads up, and those ads also had way too much health. And I compared the health values of the first boss in Newer Bar Palace with 16 people, and with 11 people in Blackrock Depths, and it wasn't too much difference. I think only about 300 million, which is a boss that also spawns a lot of ads, compared to a boss that does not, which is the first boss in New Palace. He only spawns in the phase that you can't even hit him, and then after we tried this, we went into normal. We would have cleared everything if we hadn't spent that time trying heroic. We got the last boss, the last 5 minutes of a raid, but we had to call it because our raid runs rather late in the night. And then that's when I found out that the lockouts don't keep, because I thought I was going to keep the lockout to the last boss. Not the case. We had to start over, and deflated all our enthusiasm for the raid, mostly. So there's that problem. Now, is Blackrock Depths a failure? I would say so. I don't know what the goal was. I mean, I'm sure the people designing the raid like had fun with it, but I don't know what the like overhead is, if they have like any people that really tested these, who decided the scaling, if they tested it themselves, even with a group full of 630 item level people and you having problems. I know item level isn't necessarily the biggest marker of how well the people in the group are, right? Especially with crests and that sort. But that should be like huge red flag, right? You would expect that to be a huge red flag, that in the very least a group of 630 people can't just roll over the first few bosses. I understand like Pugs getting to Princess or Overnax falling apart in current newer Bar Palace, even if they're 630. Those bosses require, the group not to mess up the rifts, not to run people over the orbs, or failing to get to the eggs. Those will just cause wipes, right? And also, New Bar Palace also has the raid buff. Oh, that is another thing, is that Blackrock Depths is, a limited time event. So you only have a certain amount of time to get through these bosses. So if they're hard, you might not get through all of them because of the time constraints. So yeah, I don't know why they made this raid difficult. I really don't understand it. It's a huge misfire, and I would assume if we do the raid again, we'd probably get through most of them now. The first heroic nerf, we got through like the first two bosses, and we could have killed the third, but again, why bother? You're not really getting out of it, and if a lockout isn't keeping, that, you can't. We don't want to continue it, rather than we can't. We could probably kill the third boss, but with this new set of nerfs, we'd get there, but how much is that worth? I have no idea. Anyways, thanks for listening. See ya.